she's fighting to get more for them. So will this budget, which is a no-frills budget, as you've called it, do anything to help the elderly living in poverty?
I'm not making any further budget announcements today.
They are living in poverty.
I accept that there's a number of New Zealanders who are finding the cost of living a very big challenge at the moment, and that is something that the government's committed to addressing.
$79 million that could be saved by not giving the winter energy payment to those who don't need it could be used in a more targeted way.
I'm absolutely ruling out means testing for superannuation or the winter energy payment, which is allocated based on eligibility for New Zealand superannuation.
Does the government consider that at all? Has it considered in any review of any winter of the winter energy payment?
Not to my knowledge. Certainly not to my knowledge. If there has been any at an officials level, I've not seen it.
Prime Minister, on the KiwiRail disruptions in Wellington, this is a state-owned enterprise after all. How much responsibility does the government take for these failures?
As you will have seen, I think if a statement hasn't been issued, it will be very shortly, that we are going to be conducting a review into how KiwiRail found themselves in this position. It isn't acceptable. It is a core responsibility of KiwiRail to maintain the tracks such that the commuter rail services can be delivered in a timely and reliable manner. And clearly they've dropped the ball here. It's very important that we quickly understand why that happened and that they work as quickly as they can to make sure that those rail services are restored to their normal levels as quickly as possible.
We know why it happened. They had a specific piece of equipment that broke down because they only had one of them. There could be critics that say the government should be funding KiwiRail more so this doesn't happen. How would you respond to that?
Around billions of dollars a year, billions of dollars over the time that we have been in government have been put into KiwiRail for things like basic track maintenance. Lack of funding isn't an excuse. And so if they have one piece of machinery that they're reliant on, one would think that they would have taken steps to make sure they've got some backup in the event that something happens there.
Question around resource allocation from KiwiRail then.
It is ultimately an operational consideration for KiwiRail. That's one of the reasons why we've asked for a review very quickly to identify exactly how this has happened.
So frequently that your government is doing rapid reviews into things and not seeing the problem coming. Are your ministers driving those ministries and SOEs enough for the answers that they need before it gets to a point where we're at a crisis, if you're spraying billions of dollars at them?
It's absolutely fair to say that over a long period of time, several decades, our rail system has been run down. Our government has put billions of dollars into upgrading the rail network. I wouldn't expect to be seeing the sort of disruption that Wellington commuters are currently seeing when we have invested such a lot of money into improving maintenance and reliability.
Money doesn't magic up results. Are your ministers checking where that money is going? Do they have oversight if you're spraying billions of dollars at a problem? Do you have oversight that that problem is actually being addressed?
I wouldn't expect ministers to know whether there's one machine or multiple machines who do the checking of the tracks. I would think that that is something that KiwiRail should accept responsibility for.
Prime Minister,
just back on the coronation, how are you feeling about travelling for that event, and what's the significance, if any, to New Zealand, the coronation of the King?
Well, the coronation is certainly a significant international event, and I think it's important that New Zealand is well represented at the coronation. The King is our head of state, and until New Zealanders take a decision otherwise, it will continue to be. Yeah, it's a significant part of history. These things don't happen very often. It'll be, for most New Zealanders, it'll be the first time there's been a coronation in their lifetimes. Gosh, that prompted a lot of extra questions.
Are you a monarchist or a Republican?
I think I'm on record as being a Republican. I think I've never made any secret of that, but I've also indicated it's not a priority for me. It's not something I intend to push. I think when New Zealanders are ready to have a debate about whether or not they want to become a republic, then I will just be one vote in that. But I don't. It's not something that I intend to prioritise.
Now is that time, right?
Yeah, I don't believe it's the right time to do it. Yeah.
The ceremony includes a pledge of loyalty to the King. Will you take that pledge of loyalty to?
As a New Zealander, yes, I will, because the King is our head of state. As I've taken pledges to previously to the Queen and subsequently to the King. When I became Prime Minister, I believe I was the first New Zealand Prime Minister to take that pledge already.
Would you be encouraging New Zealanders to take that pledge as well?
That's a matter for New Zealanders, but in terms of our oaths and affirmations that we have in New Zealand, our oaths and affirmations do involve a pledge of loyalty to the reigning monarch, which in this case is King Charles III.
Have any proposals to tax the wealthy more, either through a CGT or some kind of wealth tax? Have any of those come to Cabinet at all this year?
Sorry, what was the...
Any proposals to tax wealthy people more, either in the form of a wealth tax or a CGT or something along those lines, have any of those proposals gone to Cabinet this year?
As I indicated last week, we consider a range of issues around tax as part of the budget process, and we'll be releasing all of that as part of the post-budget information release. I've made it very clear where we stand between now and the election, and then the Labour Party will release its tax policy prior to the election. I'm not going to get into the what was and wasn't considered as part of the budget process discussion until after the budget.
Wasn't you just say no,
this
right?
weekend said that something did go to Cabinet, and your answer there suggests that something did go to Cabinet in that process, but it was rejected.
I'm not going to get into a commentary of what Nicola Willis has said, unless, of course, you want to ask me about some of the other outrageous claims that she made. But
You're wrong. That something went to Cabinet and it was rejected.
as I've indicated, we don't talk about what the Cabinet did and didn't consider as part of the budget process until after the budget. It's only a couple more weeks to go, and then you'll get all of those answers.
Didn't consider a wealth tax or a capital gains tax at Cabinet, then you'd just be able to say no to that question.
Very clearly, I've ruled out either of those things happening in the budget.
So pharmacists have said that the $5 co-payment is stopping, obviously, the poorest New Zealanders from accessing medicines they need. Will your government do anything about this?
I've certainly acknowledged the effect that the co-payment has on the pharmacists, but also on some often low-income New Zealanders who do have to pay that. I'm not making any announcements on that today, but I do acknowledge that it is a real issue.
It would take a lot of pressure off the health system, and it's a great cost of living boost for people. If that is a substantial amount of money for them, that seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, look, as I've indicated, I'm not making any announcements on that today, but I acknowledge the issues that have been raised.
On your republicanism, you've just said it's not a priority for your government. Might it be a priority for a second-term Hipkins government?
No, I can't envisage doing it. It's certainly not in the next term. To do something like that, my view is that that's a significant constitutional decision, and therefore would be a decision for New Zealanders to make by way of a referendum. I don't intend to propose one at the next election or during the next term.
Okay, so you call yourself a Republican, but you're one of the few people in the country that could do something about that, and you're choosing not to. Why?
Because I don't regard it as a priority at the moment. The constitutional arrangements that we have are working quite soundly at the moment. A decision to become a republic would involve a whole lot of other potential decisions that could be quite distracting at a time when I think New Zealanders have indicated they want us focused on much more pressing issues.
Why are you a Republican then?
Look, ideally, I think in time New Zealand will become a fully independent country. We'll stand on our own 2 feet in the world, as we by and large do now. I don't think that swapping out the Governor-General for some other form of head of state is necessarily an urgent priority right now, though.
But why are you a Republican? Why do you believe in that?
But because I believe that we should ultimately be an independent country.
Do something about it.
As I've indicated, I don't see it as a huge priority for me or for New Zealand right at the moment.
Prompt that,
Yeah.
Prime Minister. Just on that, what would it take to prompt that? And would you have to have every third person that talks to you out on the street say I want a referendum? You and former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern are in the same position, but not prepared to do anything about it. So what would it take to do something?
Honestly, I think it is something for New Zealanders to instigate a discussion on, and there isn't a groundswell of support for having this particular debate right at the moment, and I don't particularly have any interest in pushing that debate on New Zealanders at the moment.
Yeah. 2 questions from RNZ Pacific. Are you aware that there's a new hostage negotiator for Philip Merton in West Papua? Have you had any briefings, or is there any new information on that situation?
I've been getting regular briefings on the hostage situation, and the New Zealand government is absolutely committed to doing what we can to secure his release and his return to his family, and to as much as we can supporting his family and him. Obviously, we don't have access to him through what is a very difficult situation. We absolutely condemn hostage taking. Our foreign policy position is not now, nor never will be, affected or altered in any way by actions such as this. So I don't want to comment on the specifics of who's talking to whom or what negotiations may or may not be happening. But I do want to, but other than to say that some of the information that's in the public domain is incorrect.
So that's not correct that there's a new, because that was published by ABC.
Yeah, as I've indicated, I don't want to comment on specifics. Some of the, if I get into, saying which information is correct and which isn't, then I'm going to be getting into a level of detail which I'm not comfortable doing, given this is a very sensitive matter, and obviously our first and foremost consideration has to be the security and the safety of the hostage. In a significant public discussion of that's not likely to be in his best interests.
Rinsey. Have you seen the report? There was a community lawyer in Auckland that was alleging his client, an alleged overstayer, had been apprehended by police through dawn raid tactics recently.
I haven't received a detailed briefing on that yet, other than some quick analysis of the public reporting of that. That does concern me. Those aren't the sorts of tactics that I would expect us to be using in New Zealand. I have received assurance that no ministers were aware that that was going to take place. And I understand that the Associate Minister of Immigration is reviewing the case of the individual concerned. So obviously that's a decision that now sits with that minister. But those sorts of tactics aren't the ones that I would expect New Zealand officials to be engaging in.
Especially after the apology for the dawn raids, right?
That is quite right. And so the fact that something appears to have happened here without any knowledge of the ministers is something that I'm very concerned about.
Granted, he's probably got a few things on this week. Have you managed to secure any FaceTime with the King or any members of the royal family, and is that something that you would expect to have if you were going over?
Yes, I do. I'm not sharing the details of that right at the moment, but yes, I will be meeting with several members of the royal family, including, well, I just have, haven't I? Including the King.
You will be meeting with the King. Are you bringing a gift on behalf of New Zealand, and what would that be?
I'm not confirming all the details of the bilateral discussions that I'm going to be having, or what may or may not be exchanged. I'm not confirming details of specific engagement with members of the royal family today.
Having a one-on-one meeting with King Charles?
I'm not confirming any specifics. We will let you know well in advance of anything such as that happening.
Let the cat out of the bag there. So can you give us a little bit of what you plan to say to him? Or?
No.
Climate Change Commission released its report on the second emissions budget. It was quite critical of the government's progress towards meeting that target, as well as what the government's done to the ETS. What was your response or reaction to that?
There's nothing particularly new in the Commission's report. The Commission's report contains a lot of recommendations and a lot of advice of things the government's doing already. In some areas, it doesn't take into account more recent developments, and certainly doesn't take into account some of the stuff that we haven't yet announced. So there's more to come in this space.
Prime Minister, there have been reports about changes to the car discount. Why do we need to rethink this?
Well, of course, it's been an incredibly successful scheme. We're very pleased that we've seen a much larger uptake of renewable energy vehicles, electric vehicles in particular, as a result of that scheme. We've got to make sure that the scheme is sustainable, and we've got to make sure that we're getting the best bang for buck out of it. So that does involve periodically reviewing the criteria, and we'll be making announcements on that shortly.
Does it need a major overhaul? Does it need big changes to happen to keep it being effective?
There'll be some changes. I'm not announcing them today, but there will be some changes.
Are you concerned that removing the low-emitting petrol vehicles from that scheme will discourage people from those low-emissions vehicles into maybe medium emitters?
I see what you're trying to do there. You're trying to get me to comment on changes that we haven't announced. So I'm not going to.
Do you feel comfortable that wheelchair users...
Yes.
Do you feel comfortable that cars specifically for wheelchair users come under the Clean Car Standard and don't have an exemption?
It's something that that is something that we've canvassed as part of the forthcoming changes that we'll be announcing, and so there'll be more detail coming on those.
Are you hopeful of getting an entry into force date for the UK-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement?
I'm optimistic.
Does that mean it's already in the bag?
I'm optimistic.
You've got a detailed travel schedule this year, despite saying you wanted to keep it slim. Do you also hope to head to Ukraine at some point? Is that on your list of wants to go?
Not currently.
Prime Minister, what's your message going to be to the King when you have your one-on-one with him?
I haven't confirmed that.
If President Zelensky invited you to Ukraine while you were at the NATO meeting, would you go?
Sorry, what was the question again?
President Zelensky, you're going to talk to him this evening, I believe. If he invited you to visit Ukraine while you were attending the NATO meeting, either side of that meeting, would you go?
I've got a relatively busy travel schedule, and of course quite a lot that I need to attend back in New Zealand. I wouldn't rule out ever doing it, but scheduling-wise, I think it's looking unlikely in the next few months.
Nearby, it's a lot closer, Ukraine is to Lithuania than is New Zealand.
You're asking me hypothetical questions. Joe.
Why was the cost of living payment means tested?
Sorry?
Living payment, why was that means tested?
Well, that was a decision that we took at the time.
Do you think that it was appropriate to means test the cost of living payment?
Yes.
Your speech last week said that there would be no major tax changes in the budget. That leaves the door open to minor tax changes. Are there minor tax changes in the budget?
I'm not going to start announcing the budget today. But good on you. Good on you for being persistent.
You ruled out many tax changes in the budget.
I'm not going to announce the budget today, or I'm not going to tell you what is or isn't in it.
But you've already ruled out a capital gains tax, a wealth tax, and a cyclone levy. Will you rule out any?
I'm not adding to the comments I made last week.
Who is the minister?
I'm just trying to look at the clock. I've got another minute or two.
Who is the minister in charge of? Who is the lead minister when it comes to the discussions around Pillar 2 of AUKUS?
That would ultimately be me.
Okay, but under the AUKUS, is it Nanaia Mahuta or Andrew Little?
Look, at the moment, discussions around Pillar 2 are purely hypothetical. So at this point, the scope of Pillar 2 is not yet fully known. And the process for discussions with other countries who may or may not join Pillar 2 is also not yet known. So it's all very hypothetical at this point.
Your cabinet ministers on the same page, though, do you think? Because Andrew Little seems a little bit more enthusiastic, and Nanaia Mahuta a little more reticent. Has there been a?
I don't think there's any real difference between them at all. The reality is it's an entirely hypothetical conversation at the moment because the scope of Pillar 2 isn't even yet known. So I think at this point everything is speculative.
It's hypothetical, though, isn't it? Because Kit Campbell explicitly said that New Zealand would, there would be discussions with New Zealand about whether we would like to join. So it's not hypothetical, they've said.
So if you take the topics that we understand to be part of Pillar 2, so things around cybersecurity, around foreign interference and so on, those are issues that we do look to work with like-minded international partners on, and we currently do that now. We work with the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, and a range of other international partners on these issues, and we'll continue to take opportunities to do that where appropriate. In terms of specifically around AUKUS, as I've indicated, it's very hypothetical at this point because there isn't a formal invitation on the table. There's also, it's not entirely clear what we would or wouldn't be invited to. So I think, as I've indicated, these are all very hypothetical questions.
Have you made any decisions about New Zealand's engagement in any AUKUS-related matters since Andrew Little said that he had basically agreed with the US to explore having a conversation about AUKUS because access to defence technology alongside the nuclear elements that would be part of Pillar 2 was important?
I'm not quite sure what the question that you're getting to is, but
have you made any determinations around AUKUS-related discussions since Kurt Campbell's visit?
There have been no formal decisions on any New Zealand engagement around AUKUS. At this point, any conversations are purely at the hypothetical, very informal end of it.
Just back on the clean car discount, are you confident that the changes that you're making to the scheme will now make the scheme revenue neutral as it was designed to be?
I'm not making the announcements today.
If you have an audience with the King, will you discuss your republicanism?
I'm not making that announcement. Again, there is a long-standing convention that where New Zealand Prime Ministers or ministers meet with members of the royal family, that the topics of conversation don't get disclosed other than in a very broad and general sense.
Also on the coronation, why is it important to you that the opposition leader also goes? The Australian Prime Minister hasn't extended the invitation to the Australian opposition leader.
I think we have to recognise it's election year in New Zealand, and so that does put us in a slightly different category to some of the other countries.
You're taking him because he could be Prime Minister in a few months?
It is a possibility.
How would New Zealand benefit from
I hope not, but it's a possibility.
Would you ever introduce a tax-free threshold in New Zealand?
I'm not playing the rule in or rule out game on tax today.
Would you do that?
Sorry, what was that?
Would you do that in this budget?
I'm not playing the rule in or rule out game today, and I'm not going to get into what may or may not be in the budget, despite the fact that I made some quite clear statements last week, which I stand by. I'm not adding to them today.
You say you think New Zealand should be an independent country. How would New Zealand benefit from being an independent country from the monarchy?
Look, I actually think at a practical level, the change for New Zealand could be quite a minor one. But like I said, it's just not a priority for debate at the moment, in my view. All right, we're done. Very good. Last question to Claire.
When Cabinet settled on the possibly minor tax changes in the budget, was David Parker's heart broken a lot or just a little bit?
That's a very cruel question. Cabinet collective responsibility has certainly applied to all of the decisions that we've taken around the budget. Thanks, everybody.